Hi, and welcome to this feature today on the Olegtron 4060. This is a first feature I'm doing on the Olegtron. I'll offer, I believe, 3 features. This first one will just give you an overview of the device. I'll share some of the sounds of it with you, talk about some approaches to maybe using it in music. The second will be an unboxing that shows you exactly what you get if you purchase one of these devices. And the third one will be emphasizing musical experiments of a variety of approaches, including sonic approaches, using this as a sequencer that you could hook into your CV modular gear, that you could also use, say, in conjunction with an envelope follower to create some interesting effects with other external devices. So hopefully in this feature you'll get a sense of what this device is, why you might purchase one, or how you might use it in some of your musical experiments. And as you can see here, I actually have 2 of these. I ended up purchasing 2. There was a sale around Black Friday, so I thought it was a really good price for just somewhere near around $100. Typically these average about 125 US dollars. And this is actually called the Mark II. It came out recently. It's a company in Finland that has created these. And essentially, to describe what it is a sonic device that allows you to create essentially your own patch points using supplied transistors, resistors, circuits, breadboard, Arduino cables. And the excitement of this particular instrument, I think for me, is that fact that you get to create something that has a real physical and tangible side to it in terms of using all of these electronic components. Now, I would say that for people familiar with, say, engineering, electrical engineering, for people who are involved in the Arduino community, probably a lot of the stuff here you're much more versed in than I am. That is not my particular background. But for me, what was exciting about getting one of these devices is that in some ways it replicates, I think, the landscape of what makes Eurorack so exciting for me. And you can see some of my cables here for my Eurorack setup. So for me, there's something very tangible and physical about taking cables in my Eurorack modular setup and creating patches. And often there's a process by which, I've often said in my videos, it's organic, it's experimental, and there's a lot of things that you can predetermine in a Eurorack setup, but there are also a lot of things that just happen on the fly, that happen because of chance, because of some combination that you've established by just plugging one cable into a jack and seeing what happens. And for me, that's really what makes the Olegtron pretty exciting in the respect that, again, it's very physical. You're plugging things into a unit, and the sounds that come out are highly experimental. They're very different. They do have an organic sound to them for what they're, I think, geared at sounding like. And if you like things like chiptune or glitch sounds or odd wavetable units, drone units, synthesizers, Eurorack modules, then I think this is entirely something that you will find interesting. If you're looking for something traditional, if you're looking for something lush, for something melodic, for something expressive in some sort of traditional sense of timbres maybe that are more associated, say, with, Vangelis or electronic music of that sort, this is not necessarily maybe for you. And I think when you search for a device like this and you consider adding it to your setup, like I do for any device I buy, I go online, I go to YouTube, I go to the manufacturer's site if there's something there, and I try to search for sounds and experiments and walkthroughs like this that maybe tell me a little bit about what I could expect if I purchase a device like this. I would say an initial sense, as I'm describing the sonic side of it and how it works in terms of its, say, approach, just in terms of how you physically work with it, has a lot of things in common, say, with something like the Lyra Soma, which is, I think, a really great experimental synthesizer. And it reminds me I need to do more with my Lyra 8. And then also, in a much different sense, not as a sound generator, but it also does remind me of what the cats in Berlin, Coma, are doing with the field kit and also the field kit effects, and they do have some other units, including a few Eurorack modules. Now, the field kit, of course, is much less a sound generator, save the CV radio, the potentials of the LFO, and more of a mixer that allows you to control motors and solenoids and do very experimental music concrete stuff, particularly through the gain here that you can use with, say, piezo mics. This is a little bit different. Now, I would say some of you commenting on my YouTube channel have been talking about actually using the Olegtron in combination with the Coma, and I think that would be pretty cool. So it's something for me to try out in the future. But I mentioned these other devices because really something like the 4060 is experimental in nature. It's not going to appeal to everyone. For me, there's something about the sound that I find fascinating. There's something about the patching that I find very interesting. And then that sense of surprise, that sense of something organic that happens when you start working with the unit is also what attracted me to purchasing not one, but the two of these. Now, on initial look of this, and again, watch my second video on the unboxing. I'll be much more specific in that about what you get, the instructions you receive. And the instructions, I would say, are pretty good. You get a two-page instruction sheet that has the information about the unit itself. That includes, say, all of the things that you need to know to get started. There's still a sense of mystery to this, and if you go to the website of Olegtron, you know, there is some interesting information I would definitely recommend about philosophy, approach to sound, and sonic devices. The reverse of that instruction page has all the information about the electronic components that you get that really make this unit I think quite magical in terms of what it does for you. But again, if you go to that website, there's a lot more there in terms of philosophy behind this and so forth. And I think not unlike, say, Coma or what Vlad is doing with Soma and their unique devices, is in the world today, just because of how things like Kickstarter work, you know, microeconomies, new funding patterns, and just the way that you can easily use the internet, social media, YouTube, Facebook to get your product out there, devices like these, like the stuff that Coma does, like the stuff that Soma does, are possible. And that's pretty exciting to me. So I guess I would say is even if the instructions or, say, product backup or assistance isn't there, we have to be pretty excited that these devices exist in the first place, because years ago, if they would have existed, they would have been way too prohibitive in terms of their costs and so forth. So what we can do is turn on the first one here, and I have this patched up, and this is not anything in particular. And the first thing you'll notice, I actually have it hooked up to my ETC, so we're getting that effect in the background. Hopefully it's not too annoying. I think it looks kind of cool. If it is annoying, I'm sure all of you will mention in the comments. People are very vocal, and that's certainly fine in the comment section. Keep in mind these videos are all volunteer basis, so I'm not representing any companies or anything like that. I'm doing it on my own, and you know, it's my own perceptions and interpretations. So what you're hearing actually is the raw sound of this, and what I was thinking was that, like a lot of devices out there, you could use this almost as a primary sound generator in combination, say, with some of your interesting effects pedals. So I could immediately make this sound much different by turning on my Ventris dual reverb. And of course I can tweak some of the parameters on the Ventris. And continue to alter the sound here. Trying to get to a sweet spot there in our video synthesizer. For a second there, we actually lost the sound. like a lot of the devices you might have in your arsenal, whether they're drone pedals or things like the Olegtron, you can really use them in conjunction with other external gear. And we can take a look at one more example of that here. And so if we wanted to put it through this, another just really cheap downer pedal, modulation pedal, and see how the sound is affected by it. So we could potentially get some, interesting phase effects just using a very cheap, say, flanger or phaser. Again, we can turn the sound off. You hear the difference. Additional modulation effects. Yeah, so in any case, you get the idea there. And I guess the point to make about this is that, it's pretty versatile if you want to use it, particularly I think for experimental avant-garde sound experiments in some of your approaches that you might have. So obviously, we can use the Olectron 4060 as part of an array of sonic approaches that we might be interested in using with various effects pedals and so forth. I think for the rest of the demo, I'll just play the dry signal so that you get a better sense of what it sounds like. By the way, there is a temporary on switch, so you can do something like this. And it's kind of cool. I don't know how much I would use that, but in a previous video I saw for the first 4060, there was an experiment where someone created essentially a drum sound using this effect by just cycling the sound on and off. So it's one of many features I think on this device that make it somewhat experimental, to say the least. So if we turn the unit back on, you'll see what happens when I just remove some of the components. And one of the things that I think is so unique about the Olectron is that one simple patch point changed, as you just noted there, completely alters the sound. And you see that reflected on our graphic display. And there's further variation of this because you have control over the frequency, the pitch, and then the amount of power that's, in this case, being starved to the unit or giving it more power. And you see the dramatic sonic effect of that. And then at some points we actually, this is of course dependent on the circuit, so at some points we might lose the sound. And then the sound starts to change in some radical ways, again because of how it's patched and the nature of the current going through the device. And we can remove another component and hear the effect on the sound. And it really does require you to experiment. And I've noted in a couple cases when I've patched up some patches on the 4060 that if the component is not in, if it's out a little bit, then I sometimes am like checking my components and I might find like, oh, that one's actually not fully in the jacks. And I do recommend reading the manual and checking some stuff out online because really this device is so versatile because of all these patch points. The different blocks of the unit, ranging from the oscillator in blue, the power section here, the reset here, and so forth, allows you really to create some incredibly unique sounds in terms of your experiments. My display actually went away there a second and I lost the original color, but in some ways I like this actually a lot better. Again, we're just experimenting, removing components, and you can kind of see the effect there. Very dramatic. And now we just have our one Arduino cable patched in there. And what's kind of cool is you'll see in the unboxing, you get so many components. I actually picked up 2 of these jewelry containers that you can get on Amazon, and they're pretty useful because you can take like all your LED lights if you want in one, and then in the other you could have capacitors and resistors and everything else. And if you read the instructions for the Olectron, things are color coded, so you'll get different effects with different components that you might plug in. And again, as you continue to experiment, you might just come across a sound that sounds interesting. Now, if you know about electronic engineering and you work with Arduino, then you have a much maybe different approach to the Olectron than I do. Again, I think we're getting a situation there. No, I guess it is actually plugged in. So, and again, we can adjust the power, and you see the effect, or hear the effect, and see it, I guess. Could plug an additional component in. One of the things I like is they give you components that have between 2 and 4 pins on them. So you get some dramatic effects when you start taking advantage of all those. And not every patch point will necessarily result in something ideal. So we continue to try something else. And you see just how dramatic the sound changes when I adjust the current. And I've been, by the way, using my units without external power. You could plug in a 9-volt typical adapter plug in there. But I find it's actually pretty convenient not having that extra plug there. I can just worry about my output, or eventually, as you'll see in my later experiments, the inputs, and do all my patching there and not have to worry about an additional power cable. So yeah, for me at this point, I've spent a lot of time just experimenting with the various sounds I can get out of the Olectron. And I thought I would plug in the second one, give you a sense of what I have patched in there. This is using the LEDs. And so in this particular case, actually, I guess I have a capacitor in there and a bunch of LEDs and my one breadboard cable. I'm just checking my connections because it seems like something might be loose. And this is a sound really as you hear it. I mean, the last patch I had on the other unit, to me, like, you could start to imagine creating a sequence, and it wouldn't take you that much. And that's why I got 2 of these units. I thought I could create competing sequences and use those in some sort of sonic experiment. This one, the way I patched it, I wanted to discover more of a drone sound, something I could use as an expressive drone in combination with my effects pedals or my Eurorack setup. And I think this achieves that. Again, this is 0 effects. And just listen to how rich that is, the harmonics in this sound. I mean, that sound right there, just coming from this somewhat over $100 unit, I think could rival very expensive synthesizers out there. If you just listen to that sound, how it's phasing as I adjust the frequency up, down to up, low to high. And we can adjust the current. And what I noticed is you can find a sweet spot like that depending on what you're working on, and discover that and really find some nice harmonics and some sonic timbre qualities to the sound based on your experimentation. But I prefer it when it's a nice, kind of juicy drone there. And again, we won't do it, but imagine that through reverb, imagine that through a distortion pedal. Some of the new boutique pedals out there are just absolutely amazing and cost. I mean, you can get a boutique pedal that's 4 times, 5 times the price of this. So certainly you could imagine many potential uses with this unit. And I was maybe going to try to do one more patch point if I could. And again, every time that you patch a new component, you can experiment with the frequency and then the current that you're giving to it, because that will also change. So I mean, essentially, the variation you can create with one of these Olectrons is pretty incredible, right? Because you have control over these two knobs, you have control over the placement in the blocks of your electronic components, and of course the specific electronic component that you're using will radically affect this. And as these start to work in combination with one another, creating a circuit, that's where you get, I would say, the really complex sounds with this particular unit. In my third video on Olectron, what I want to try to do there is to show you the rich possibilities in terms of using one of these units in a variety of sonic or CV senses. Yeah, so I think that will just about do it for today as far as our first initial introduction to the Olectron 4060. If you get a chance to get one of these devices, I think, again, depending on the type of music or sonic experiments you're doing, you'll find a lot of possibilities in terms of using this interesting electronic instrument in some ways maybe that rival some of your other devices out there. And for a price point of just over $100 US, I think you get a lot in a very small package. And the last thing I would mention about that is if you're doing anything on the road, if you're doing performances with small units like Volcas or Teenage Engineering pocket operators, this would be a wonderful addition because you could use it in conjunction with the Volcas or the pocket operators and really make some interesting sounds and create a sonic palette that I think is very, very unique. So stay tuned for my 2 additional videos on the Olectron 4060 Mark II.